Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we can go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. One of the biggest things that keep people stuck in recovery is how they see themselves, because whether we realize it or not, the way that we define ourselves shapes everything, our thoughts, our behaviors, and even our future. And for many of us, when we get sober, we hold on to an identity that actually keeps us trapped. Think about it. If every day you wake up and tell yourself, I'm an alcoholic, what does that reinforce? That drinking is at the core who you are. That no matter how long you stay sober, you're always one step away from falling back into that life. That your addiction, that is your identity. But what if I told you that's not true? What if I told you that one of the most powerful shifts you could make in recovery isn't just quitting drinking, but changing how you see yourself? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. How the way you define yourself in sobriety can be the thing that either keeps you stuck or that sets you free. We're going to break down why continuing to call yourself an alcoholic may actually be holding you back, and how shifting your identity to someone who simply doesn't drink can change everything. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, especially if you spent time in traditional recovery programs. If I don't identify as an alcoholic, I'll forget my struggle and then I'll relapse. Now, I understand how you feel when you say that because I used to feel the same. But let's examine that logic in other areas of our lives. Let's say you have a friend who struggled with parenting when they first had kids, but has since learned and grown into an amazing parent. Would you tell them that they should still call themselves a bad parent every day just to remind themselves that one wrong move could make them a bad parent again? Of course not. Or let's take something even more basic. When you were a kid, you probably threw some temper tantrums. Maybe you screamed and stomped your feet when you didn't get your way. My mom will probably tell you I was guilty of that. But do I walk around today introducing myself as, "Hi, I'm Tim and I'm a recovering tantrum thrower"? No, because I'm not that person anymore. I grew past it. In what other area of growth do we anchor ourselves to our lowest point as a supposed safeguard? We don't tell someone recovering from depression to remind themselves daily, "I am depressed," to prevent a setback. Instead, we help them develop awareness of their triggers, build resilient skills, and celebrate their personal growth. Why should addiction recovery be any different? Being aware of your vulnerabilities isn't the same as making them your identity. There's a big difference between I am an alcoholic and I'm someone who learned drinking isn't for me and quit so I could build a better life. One keeps you tethered to the past, the other acknowledges your history while creating space for a new life. You see, our behaviors always follow our identity, and I mean always. If you see yourself as an athlete, you don't have to try to go to the gym. You just go, because that's what athletes do. If you see yourself as a musician, you naturally pick up your guitar to play, because that's just part of who you are. But if you see yourself as an alcoholic, what does that tell your brain? That alcohol is still a core part of you. That drinking is something you do, even if you're currently not doing it. And that's dangerous. Because identity is powerful. Your brain will do everything in its power to prove your identity true. If deep down you still believe you're an alcoholic, someone who struggles with drinking, someone who can't trust themselves, someone who is always one step away from relapse, guess what? Eventually, your brain is going to lead you back there. This is why willpower isn't enough to stay sober long term. You might have all the motivation in the world, but if your identity still says, "I'm an alcoholic," eventually that identity will win. You might last a few months, a few years even, but deep down, you're reinforcing the idea that drinking is still part of who you are, just something you're temporarily trying to control. But what if instead you became someone who simply doesn't drink? Think about how different that feels. Not I'm an alcoholic trying to avoid drinking. Not I'm in recovery, but alcohol is still a major factor in my life. Just I don't drink. Not because I can't, not because I'm constantly fighting cravings, because that's just not who I am anymore. That one shift, going from defining yourself as an alcoholic to identifying as someone who simply does not drink, makes a world of difference. Because now, instead of fighting against something, you're aligning your actions with who you already believe you are. And I'm not just saying this as a theory, I've lived it. For years, I repeated to myself, my name is Tim and I'm an alcoholic. I was told I needed to stay close to that identity, that the second I forgot it, I'd be in danger of relapse, that if I ever got too confident in my sobriety, I'd be that much closer to picking up a drink. And because I was scared, because I didn't want to relapse, because I didn't want to die, I believed it. But that belief didn't heal me. It didn't give me peace. It kept me trapped in fear. Instead of feeling free in my sobriety, I felt like I was constantly on guard, always bracing for the moment alcohol would sneak back in and take me out. And that is no way to live. Then I attended a Tony Robbins conference, and something he said made me start questioning whether continuing to identify as an alcoholic was the thing that was actually keeping me stuck. I came across my notebook from that event the other day while searching for something else, and reading through my notes reminded me how powerful that moment was for me. I want to share some of these notes with you because they completely shifted how I saw myself. Tony talked about identity and how the words that you attach to your experience become your experience. And that hit me. What if holding on to the label alcoholic was the very thing keeping me from moving forward? He said, whatever you identify with, you become. Your identity shapes your decisions, which shapes your destiny. And in the margin of the notebook, I wrote a question to myself. What if that identity is now causing me pain? Then he said something that really stuck with me. The strongest force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. And I had to ask myself, was I still allowing alcohol to have power over me, even though I haven't touched a drop in over 6 years? And then another Tony quote, if you keep telling yourself the same story, you'll keep living the same life. And that one stung a little, because here I was telling myself every single day, my name is Tim and I'm an alcoholic. I thought I was keeping myself safe, but what if all I really was doing was reinforcing a story that no longer served me? What if constantly reminding myself of my addiction was actually holding me back from fully stepping into my new life? I realized something in that moment. When you change what you believe about yourself, you transform your entire life. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to change what I believed about who I was. After that conference, I stopped calling myself an alcoholic. Instead, I'm someone who does not drink. People ask me all the time, well, if you're denying that you're an alcoholic, what keeps you from going back to drinking? Well, if I don't drink, why would I drink? I'm not in denial that if I drink that I would burn my life to the ground like every other time I drank. It's simply that I've learned my lesson from my past experiences, and because of that, I no longer drink. And that simple identity shift changed everything and removed my anxiety and fear around drinking. I went from obsessing about drinking to obsessing about not drinking to drinking simply being something that was just a part of my past, which no longer has any control over me today. And this isn't just some feel-good concept that a self-help guru discussed at his conference. There's actual science behind this. Studies on identity-based habits show that when people change their idea of who they are, their behavior changes along with it. This is why someone who identifies as a runner doesn't have to force themselves to go for a run. It's just what they do. And it's why someone who says, I don't drink, has a much easier time staying sober than someone who says, I can't drink, or I'm trying not to drink. Because in one case, you're reinforcing that alcohol is still something you want. But in the other, it's just not part of your life anymore. I know this shift can feel radical, especially if you're in traditional recovery spaces where calling yourself an alcoholic is expected. And let me be clear, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. If identifying as an alcoholic helps you stay accountable and keeps you on track, then keep doing what works for you. But if you've been feeling stuck in your recovery, if you feel like you're constantly battling against something instead of moving towards the life you actually want, then I want to challenge you to try this. Start by noticing how you talk about yourself. Do you constantly refer to yourself as an alcoholic? Do you say things like, I'm afraid I'm going to relapse? Or repeat phrases like, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic? Because if you do, your brain is listening. And if you want to shift your identity, here's how to do it. First, start using different language. Instead of saying, I'm an alcoholic, Try saying, I don't drink. Instead of saying I'm struggling to stay sober, say I'm becoming the type of person who doesn't need alcohol to enjoy life. These small changes in language matter more than you think. Second, build evidence of your new identity. Every day you go without drinking, remind yourself, see, this is proof I don't drink. Every time you handle stress without alcohol, remind yourself, this is what a sober person does. The more you reinforce it, the more it becomes reality. And third, surround yourself with people who support this identity. If you're in spaces where the focus is always on struggle and addiction, it's going to be hard to step into a new identity of freedom and empowerment. Find people who inspire you, who are living the kind of sober life you actually want, and start modeling that. Because here's the truth. You don't have to spend the rest of your life chained to an identity of an alcoholic. You can choose something different. You could step into something greater. You could become the person who wakes up every day with confidence, knowing that alcohol has no power over you. Not because you're fighting it, but because you've outgrown it. So here's my challenge to you. For the next week, pay attention to how you talk about yourself. Catch yourself when you use language that reinforces an identity you don't want, and start shifting it. One thought, one statement, one belief at a time. Because the moment you stop identifying as someone who struggles with drinking and start seeing yourself as someone who simply doesn't drink, everything changes. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you are, please do me a favor, grab your phone and text one person you think might benefit from listening to this episode. That would mean the world to me. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and keep living sober and happy.